I'm Paul Gladen. I'm Director of Accelerate Montana at the University of Montana, and excited to be joined today by Ben Morris, who is the founder of Coaster Cycles and more recently CC Face Shields, and we'll be learning a little bit more about why he's the founder of two businesses. But welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Paul.
So our conversation today is very, in some ways, sort of broad-ranging, but in other ways quite focused, which is really about the topic of innovation and how that has sort of shaped the evolution of the businesses that you founded. Maybe first you can just sort of give us a little brief introduction to sort of who you are and how did you get to end up being the founder of Coaster Cycles, and what is that business?
Sure. No, thanks again for having me, and pleasure to be on. And Coaster Cycles, I often call is today like a 15-year-old startup. It's lived through many different iterations and different business formats, but started back in 2005 out of college in Boston as Boston Pedicab, operating pedicabs, so taking passengers from point A to point B. It was a business that, very early on, this is in a pre-micromobility space, no Lyft, no Uber, no scooters, no bikes, no anything like that. It was us in the taxi cabs, and we were moving people around, and we grew that operation to different cities all across the country. And as we were growing businesses across our operating locations across the country, we created a media division that figured out a way to monetize that real estate and those ad space on those bikes. And as we were starting to place ad campaigns on our fleets and fleets around the country, we started talking with more and more fleet owners, and those fleet owners were coming to us saying, "Hey, look, you guys, you understand the media side of the business, you understand the operation side of the business. There's not a great product, the bike itself out there. Would you guys consider like manufacturing sort of a better bike and alternative solution based on what was in the market?" And we decided, okay, let's go try that out. That was the fall of 2012.
So initially you'd just been buying the pedicabs, and you were essentially just buying them and putting folks on them and pedaling people around the city.
Yeah, and that's what everybody was doing. There was one primary manufacturer, and everybody across the U.S. was buying from that particular company. Mm-hmm. And we looked at like what an acquisition could look like, if that made sense, or do we want to just go do it on our own? And mind you, like, we knew nothing about manufacturing. Like, we were about as novice as they come. And we ultimately decided, hey, look, we feel like we could build a better product based on our experience and knowledge of being operators and having the media business and knowing what owners wanted and passengers wanted and drivers and mechanics. And so that sort of spawned this idea of let's manufacture a better bike. And by accident, we ended up in Montana. By very accident, we ended up in Montana. And what started as just prototyping and doing proof of concept around the pedicab, the passenger version, ultimately evolved to other vehicle formats as companies started coming to us. So like, Starbucks wanting a coffee bike, UPS wanting a delivery bike, Aramark wanting a beer bike. And so that sort of is what spawned this sort of alternative vehicle format for us, right, beyond just the passenger version. And we've been building in Montana since 2014.
Right. So to sort of, I guess, unbundle the innovation elements of what you did. I mean, it sounds like the initial business model was, that was just something other people were doing, right, in terms of a basic pedicab business, but it was the media piece that was sort of your innovation that triggered other players in the industry to say, hang on, you guys are doing something. Can you innovate in the product to help us do more of what you're showing us how to do?
Yeah, certainly there was nothing innovative in what we started with. We're just taking, it's very actually straightforward. Take people point A to point B. We recognized a need in the marketplace in the time of Boston. That wasn't happening. And there was some media activation happening, but not on like a broader scale. And so that led to sort of developing these relationships with the large fleet owners, much in the way you see in like the billboard or taxi industry, and utilizing those assets. And we said, hey, look, we think we could ultimately build a better product to do this. And that was sort of that, I guess, that aha moment. All right, let's go do this.
So what was that journey like in terms of figuring out, okay, we're going to give this a go? What did you learn on that journey of sort of trying to make the first one to the second one to iterating to sort of whatever your products look like today?
It's hard. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time. I think design and engineering is something that a lot of people grossly underestimate, in terms of like how complex it can be, especially when you're sort of starting with like a piece of blank paper, right? Like, what do we want, right? And how do you take that blank piece of paper into like a production vehicle? And and we learned a lot. I mean, that sort of 2-year period was really pivotal in us trying to understand about vehicle formats going forward, and like where we really need to invest,
Mm-hmm.
and where we kind of have to do less investing in per se, and kind of more speed to market. But it was interesting. One of we ended up hiring a design and engineering firm to help us in Madison, and so we spent about 9 months with them, with like starting with that blank piece of paper to like refining concepts, and then getting to sort of a design to go prototype. And they told us when we were done, like it's going to take about it's about 5 years from when you start here to like where you really get it dialed into a place of scale. And they were pretty close.
When did you start on the journey of saying, let's try to see if we can figure out how?
2012, yeah, 2012. And like really come, 5 years later from them, like 2017, it was like we had finally had a design that we could build in scale, was profitable, was tried and true and tested, and like and it was it took that time. So right. They were right.
Yeah. I mean, you said it was hard work and it was time consuming, it was expensive. Are there things you really thought you did right and things you would do differently if you were to do it again?
So one of the things is we knew what we wanted, right? Like just having been an operator for so many years, we really knew what worked. And I think it's some of the design process, and especially in using like an outside firm, there was probably an extent of like this sort of the exploration process that was driven by them that kind of had us go a little bit further outside the bounds that maybe we necessarily didn't need to go. And I understand that design philosophy and the rationale behind that, right? But there were some things that we just knew, like this was going to be like what was going to be optimal in like a new design or new format. And so that was sort of just trusting our instincts and our gut there. And we learned, like, as we, and I'll refer back to sort of the go forward right now, how we design now, like there's less, let's not pencil out 5 different things. Like, let's look at this like one way or two way, like 1 or 2 ways, right? And not 5 different ways.
Right.
And so, our design sort of philosophy is much more refined in that way going forward now. Like we can't afford, and just too timely, too costly.
Yep.
Look at all these different versions. And so we've taken a lot of what we learned in that process, and we implement a lot of that in how we sort of design and develop like going forward now.
I mean, I think the other thing I take away from really what you said as well, though, is that it's so much being sort of customer market driven. You knew what was needed because you were out there in the marketplace day in, day out. And it sounds like that's still true, right? This was not you sort of locked up in a basement somewhere dreaming what you think the world might need. It was you trying to respond to what you could see the world was wanting.
Yep. Which is quite contradictory to like what we're doing today in all of our vehicle formats, because like the passenger version, we really knew, right? But when you start thinking about when we were doing cargo for UPS, or we're doing like coffee for Starbucks, like there's no baseline in that in terms of like, okay, this is how the market does this right now. Right. So it's like, okay, this is what we think works. This is what customer thinks works. Yep. Let's go and try to find sort of that happy medium. Right. What we have found though in doing that is usually 3 to 4 iterations of any particular bike before we get to a point where we feel like this could be like a production vehicle for them.
Mm-hmm. But at least in those situations, even though you and a Starbucks or a UPS may not know exactly what it looks like, you're very clear about what it needs to be able to do.
Yes, we know what it needs to do. And we know, like, when you think about the chassis, sort of your baseline, part of the vehicle, right? Everything gets built on top of the chassis. Once you refine an optimal scalable chassis format, right? That helps in being able to bring different sort of applications on what happens on top of that. You can look at like Ford, right? They have like one, truck chassis that is suitable for a variety of different vehicle formats. That we solidified fairly early on, right? And so that helped kind of speed the process up in terms of like adding what is then I call it the box, right? What goes on top of that chassis.
Right.
And that's where you can go sort of 100 different directions depending on what the client needs.
But that's cool. You've sort of created, I mean, literally, as a chassis, you created sort of a platform for innovation in terms of like, it's cool.
That way.
Cool. Yep. So let's switch gears. A lot of people will be sort of a little bit familiar with kind of your story over the last sort of 9 months or so in terms of how you've made this incredible pivot from kind of bikes essentially to face shields. For those that haven't heard that story before, do you just want to give us sort of the quick rundown on how you've made this amazing pivot, and then we'll sort of dive a little into some of the innovation lessons from
Sure.
that
Yes.
experience?
Yeah. So I talked a little bit a while ago about our engineering design firm, right? Who designed our pedicab. Um, Great group out of Madison. And so, when kind of COVID was kind of just kind of landing in the US in February, we had one particular client, TikTok, that we were getting ready to run an ad campaign at South by Southwest. And they came to us and they said, hey, we're thinking about, like, we're not going to do this. We're not going to go and activate in Austin, Texas. And we're like, what do you mean not going to activate? They're like, yeah, coronavirus. And we're like, all right, maybe we need to be taking this a little more seriously in terms of what the implications are for this and our business. And so, very early on, we were thinking, okay, this could be, we literally were thinking, all right, 4 weeks. What does 4 weeks look like from in February at that time? And all of a sudden, mid-March came around, and like things start shutting down, and we say, oh no, like this isn't good. And so, we had to make this difficult decision, probably the most difficult decision we've made in the 15-year history of like having to lay off a good amount of our folks, lay off and furlough. Of which we'd never done before. I mean, in all 15 years, we had never laid off or furloughed anyone. And we did that. Justin and I, my partner, who's based, up there at the factory, we did that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then Friday night, I came across this. I was on LinkedIn and I saw this open source face shield design from one of the engineers at Design Concepts. And I got that, and I emailed it over to Justin. I was like, Justin, like, we could do this. This is like, we understand the raw material in this. It seems like a pretty straightforward thing. And he's like, yeah, let's go try to do that. So I'd made early contact with Providence Hospital Group, and they said, yeah, like, looks good. Send us some samples. And so Justin had made like 2 or 3 samples at his house, sent it off to them. And they kind of wrote back and said, okay, we'll take 500,000 of them. We're like, right, well, that's great. We've only made 3 of them, but we know we can go figure out how to make 500,000 of them. And that sort of like that spawned that journey. And that was just an unbelievably crazy 3 or 4 weeks trying to work through understanding medical products and FDA requirements and like all these UAs that were just like getting into place, and then the supply chain and how we build out the supply chain, and then and more importantly, talking about how we can tool up our space in a safe manner. And so anyways, and one thing I neglected to say, and this is a really important part, as we kind of went through those round of layoffs, at the same time, obviously the virus is raging, and you're starting to hear like frontline medical people don't have PPE, and so our thought along with that was like, okay, we got people we just laid off, right, who could go and make face shields, and we have people who obviously need face shields, and like this seems to me like a pretty straightforward thing to go pursue, and that was sort of how it all started.
It seems that, I mean, that there was clearly something in your, I guess, sort of mindset, kind of makeup experience, though, that has you open to these possibilities, right? Because you could have, you said kind of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you've laid a bunch of people off. You could be like kind of, oh my goodness, I just need to unplug. This is kind of, I just need to deal with this. And yet a LinkedIn post is in front of your face and you're like, hang on, there's opportunity here. So that's not everyone that would do that. And kind of Justin as well to also look at that and say, oh yeah, no, hang on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know, like you can make the case, like Justin and I've done a lot of different things over the last 15 years. Some of those have paid off and some of those definitely have not. So we've had failures along the way, and we're quite candid and admitting to our failures and just learning, seeing what learning lessons we could take from each of them. And this would be the most extreme. I mean, we had a hot dog cart, right? Like, what are we doing with a hot dog cart? And that's a whole nother conversation. But so yeah, we saw it, and it was like, wow, like we could help people, and we could help the people, who work for us, and we could help and work with the community too. And so I don't know, just like did it. I was just like, let's go and let's do this. It happened so fast, and it seemed right, it felt right, and we knew with the bikes, like there was going to be a slowdown.
Yep.
And we were scared too. Like, we were scared for our people. We were scared for our financial obligations, with our landlords and our insurance and our debt facilities, and like it was like we have, we got to make sure that we can get through this, and that was our means to do that.
And I don't know whether you sort of saw this going into it or you look at it a little bit with hindsight, even though it's only sort of 6 to 9 months of hindsight, but do you feel that some of the things we talked about already in terms of your sort of iteration through that design process meant you went into this reasonably confident you'd be able to figure out pretty quickly whether you could or couldn't do this?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think we talked about this at maybe a previous call. Like, we look at our bill of material on a pedicab. There's like 275 parts on it to make a bike, and I looked at the face shield thing, and there was 4, right? And one of those 4 items is staple. So I was like, when you look at plastic and when you look at foam, those 2 we already build into the bikes, right? So we understood that product, had some familiarity with it, and then you add elastic into that, and so there was just this thing that kind of went through our minds. It was like, hey, look, if we could build the bike and we could engineer and do that, like we could certainly figure out how to build the proper setups, safe setups in our space, and the jigs that would be needed to go and like, put these together fast. And so it just then became a matter of like, how fast can we get the material in and how many could we make in a day? And that kind of what took it from there.
Has there been much sort of iteration in the design or in your sort of manufacturing processes since that initial sort of run?
For the face shields?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, we got a lot faster, right? Our output became like with anything, right? You don't, when you're doing that first sample, as Justin was doing at his house on his kitchen table, to when you've got, I think at the height of it, we had 115 people on it. You learn, right? You learn the fastest way to go build them and assemble them and then package them all up. And so we were seeing efficiencies that were gained almost on a weekly basis. Our output was increasing. So that was definitely exciting to see for everyone.
So as you kind of look at where you're at today, and I know you're sort of working on some other opportunities in your sort of in the Coaster Cycles kind of business, how does your sort of looking at innovation in terms of what you have going on? You had to lay people off. Did you completely stop the cycles activity, or you just reduced that to a much lower volume? And how is that looking now? Are you sort of building that business back up again, or are you reimagining that business for a sort of post-COVID or a ongoing COVID world? Talk to me a little bit about how you sort of see the world based on what you both were doing before and what you've learned through the CC Face Shields experience.
Yeah, so like one of the unfortunate parts of our business is it's so event driven and people driven, right? So you look at pedicabs, you look at bikes that we build for coffee and beer and sporting event, like everything that we did, more or less, its success was predicated being around masses of people, right? And so in sports and conventions and trade shows and like everything that has a lot of people in small areas, right? And that was like a lot of what our vehicle formats sort of where they found success. And that all stopped. And as a result of that, so did our, more or less, so did our business. And so, fairly early on, as we were building face shields, we got in touch with one of the very large last mile logistics company who's doing a lot of deliveries and was only exacerbated by COVID. And, they were looking for a solution for a new e-cargo bike platform. And so as we were doing face shields, one of the, I would say almost like one of the most profound lessons that we sort of took out of the face shield opportunity was, pre-COVID, we were building a lot of different vehicle formats. And so we had coffee and we had beer and we had cargo and we had warehouse, we had passenger, and they were good. They were all like really good, but like we weren't doing any of them great. And we weren't doing any of them like in real scale with any one. We had a couple key customers, but not like in really scale. And then as we pivoted to face shields, we did that like really well. and still to this day, like I don't know if it's just because of the simplicity of what it is. I don't know if it was sort of the timelines and tight deadlines we had to work against, but like there was just something about that we learned how to do something really simple, do it for as low cost, and then do it at scale, and work with the community along the way. And so when Justin and I started talking about like what does Coaster 3.0 look like, we were saying, we kind of want to mimic what the success we have found in the face shield business and bring that sort of strategy into our bike business, meaning, instead of doing a bunch of things, let's do, 2 or 3, right? Maybe 2 or 3 chassis or platforms and then do those in scale, right? And do those, to be just amazing vehicles with, great amount of technology and just sort of advanced telemetry and items that we just haven't seen in the space. And so, as I was alluding to earlier, we started talking with this last mile delivery company. They're looking at rolling out this program, and so we go like full-fledged into engineering, designing what we're considering is to be the most technologically advanced e-cargo bike for the last mile. And so, not only did we sort of get this dial in on this notion around fewer vehicle formats, but also sector or vertical focus too. So like right now we say, okay, we think last mile delivery has got probably the biggest opportunity for what we do. It's been validated for a long time. It's been extraordinarily validated, in a COVID environment, when you think about the number of people who are buying, things online for delivery, who are buying groceries online for delivery, who are doing food online delivery. And so that's really been the shift of our focus now, is how we can, directly work in that industry right now and do that at scale. And so we're finding, we found pretty good success in that front right now.
Can you maybe just, for folks sort of listening to this interview, and I'm sure we're all familiar and experiencing, as you say, kind of many more deliveries, ordering stuff online, whether it's kind of e-commerce stuff from Amazon or elsewhere, or whether it's kind of DoorDash and Uber Eats or whatever, delivering some food. How does your particular sort of technological solution fit relative to Uber drivers in a kind of whatever vehicle they happen to be driving around versus a UPS van or USPS? What's your point of sort of innovation and differentiation in that space?
Yeah, so certainly, like when we just speak about the last mile, and the last mile is this, it's fairly straightforward as it sounds, right? So like, how do we get literally the last mile, last half mile of that delivery, which is also the most expensive part of the delivery, accounting for about 55% of the total cost of the delivery is that last portion of it. So carriers are constantly looking for ways in which they can improve efficiencies, but also drive down costs in that portion of delivery. So, we look at the bike and we look at what we build. Certainly there's a matter of density that plays around this, right? So when you look in cities that are highly congested, Manhattan, for instance, like that's generally where every carrier starts that we work with. So where drivers can stop numerous times on like one city block. And so we start looking at, ways in which, this particular vehicle format that we build can help do that faster and do that cheaper. And so we're looking at, efficiencies around like cross-docking, freight consolidation, and that's where we see a lot of this is like, how do we consolidate freights in intercity, environments, and ultimately use less vans and less trucks and less cars to do that. And so how we do it varies by industry. So food is going to be more like catering focused, right? So you can do DoorDash or Uber Eats, right? So instead of driving my car in Manhattan to go do a catering order and look for parking and then getting parking tickets and then getting the food and then doing that all over again, you ride in like our smaller format bike. You can operate in the bike lane. You roll up in front of the restaurant, you get the food, you go out and do the delivery. And much of that sort of holds true in sort of the even grocery or parcel component of that. So this flexibility of being able to operate in the bike lane, being able to, park in smaller spaces, new loading zones that are being created by cities and municipalities for cargo bikes specifically. Those are all ways in which, we're starting to play in that space. And it's not uncomplicated, right? There's a lot of different, you've got, independent contractor models with drivers and with the major carriers versus employees and unions. And there's a lot of things that kind of play in the mix there. But what we're doing and what we're modeling has found, great success in Europe and has been proliferating in Europe for years and years and years. So like, it's not new, right? It's not like revolutionary what we're trying to do. It's more about just who's going to embrace it in the US and how do we kind of scale it up.
Yep. It sounds like there's a little technology as well you're putting into what you're building. I don't know how much you can or can't talk to that.
So technology predominantly, right, when you look at the bike space, has been fairly straightforward. Even the traditional two-wheel, right?
Right.
How fast am I going? How much battery life do I have left? Things like that, right? So, the way we think about technology is kind of around like three kind of focused areas. So safety and security. So safety for the driver, safety for pedestrians, for other vehicles, security, right? So security of our parcel and cargo, and then efficiency. So like driver efficiencies, who's moving the fastest in between deliveries. So, ways we're looking and thinking in that space on sort of a high level is, we starting to articulate and understand like how much battery life you have left based on how many packages you have to deliver to know when you're swapping out. Integrating in sensoring and LiDAR and radar to understand like crash test awareness if somebody stops in front of you, if vehicles are approaching from behind, if doors are swinging up in front of you. Distracted driving mechanisms to know, if drivers are focused on the street, if they're wearing helmets or masks, depending on like what the company wants. And then, doing driver scoring and things like that. So like, which drivers are the most efficient drivers and who are doing, deliveries the fastest. And so really building in a full suite of technology that, is talking to the driver and the carrier, but also is integrating in with our, our e-motor drive system with Bosch right now that we're working on, and just kind of, gathering all that data, studying that data, and then spewing out numbers that, ultimately our customers are going to want.
Right.
And so it's been pretty fun.
To me, I mean, it's another great sort of example of sort of innovation in terms of taking, in some ways, technologies that mostly sound like they obviously already exist, either in kind of automotive, in terms of sort of regular kind of cars that you or I might buy, logistics and things that sort of UPS and FedEx have been figuring out for years in terms of routing. And so you're sort of taking these technologies from other transportation methods and then saying, how do we build that into this solution, which, as you articulated a few minutes ago, has some points of advantage and differentiation because of the ability to use the kind of the bike lanes and so forth. So it's taking innovation from one place and saying, let's play it into the space because we understand the particular needs of our set of customers. So
and I think that's one of the really interesting parts. And I'm sure in this conversation I've mentioned our bikes as vehicles, right? Because often what we do, in some ways, we sort of look at them more as a vehicle than a bike, just because of its form and functions and the componentry that goes on it, like, and what it does. And, as we start thinking about technology, as you sort of alluded to, there is a plethora of technology that exists in the auto and OE space right now that's very applicable to what we're doing. And so we're now working with some of these auto OEs, with one in particular right now, to say, okay, how do we take a piece of technology that's readily available in a vehicle and sort of retool that to tie in sort of for the bike itself, and then to be able to deliver something that just, frankly, has not been seen in the marketplace right now. And so that's one thing that we've never had a really technology focus.
I was just going to say that this is going to be a new capability set for you.
Yeah, I mean, it totally is. And it's not that we haven't tried. We've tried and we've failed on numerous occasions. And what we learned was, there's players out there right now that have this technology readily available, right? And we can work through the algorithms and the APIs to go integrate into our bike. Like, we feel comfortable being able to provide the platform to do that with, and the knowledge of what the drivers and the carriers and the people need, and how do we get that all to talk to one another and to, create these algorithms that somebody's going to want. And so it's happening now, and I think it's just pretty exciting. It's certainly a differentiator for us. It's going to keep us, what we hope ahead of the competition. But it's going to be able to articulate some pretty fun stuff that I think, probably hasn't been seen in the space before.
Yeah, it's very cool, and sort of navigating your story from sort of right from the early doors of being sort of focused on customer needs with the media piece. You're sort of pivoting back and forth between, we understand the customer, now let's get the technology to deliver what the customer needs. Now we've got this platform. Now with COVID, it's like, well, we have the sort of the capability in terms of making these things, but now we have to pivot to a different customer, right? Because our traditional customers no longer need this. Now we figured out what their needs are. Now let's innovate in terms of our capabilities to deliver exactly what they're needing. But you're doing that from a position of strength in terms of your ability to understand customers and your ability to deliver the platform of the bike, and now integrate technology into that. So I think it's a really amazing story.
Thanks. Maybe part of our 15-year-old startup, as I said, because like we've always have stayed in this space, right? But we just, it kind of ebb and flows a bit, as sort of like our customers have different demands, and as we sort of learn about new things as well. So,
but I think it gets to, I think, sort of penultimate sort of topic of conversation away, in terms of, you clearly have created a culture, not just yourself and kind of Justin, but you've obviously created an organization that has a willingness and a culture to continue to innovate and adapt and respond to different customer needs, and to bringing in different technologies that your workforce was, admittedly, it was sort of unprecedented circumstances, but sort of by the sounds of things didn't bat an eyelid about like, okay, we're going to stop making those things, we're going to make these things, and we've got the capability to do this, so let's get after it. So how have you cultivated that sort of culture and environment that is open to sort of pivoting and adapting and adjusting?
Yeah, I think a few ways. Like one is, one thing we've sort of, Justin and I have always acknowledged and sort of worked early on is like recognizing what we're good at and what we're not good at, and that's why I think we work really well together because there's certain things that he's good at, there's certain things that I'm good at. And I think, when we think about the people who we work with, we kind of look for many of those same characteristics, right? Like who are people out there that are going to bring value to the company that we otherwise couldn't. And recognizing we can't be good at everything. And so I think that's part of it. But I think the other part is like we've just, we work, I would say, from a very sort of entrepreneurial kind of mindset. So, which is most of the time good, sometimes not always, but most of the time. So like, we're really often encouraging, the folks that like be innovative, right? Be entrepreneurial, come to us with new ideas, let's try new things. And many of those things, we have implemented and we have, going today. And so yeah, I would say, I mean, those are two, like, I would say key characteristics in terms of like our ability to really kind of invest in our folks and have them, give them the freedom to go and be creative and do innovative things and present new ideas and do them. So you have to in this business.
Right. Awesome. So sort of final topic of conversation, can you maybe talk a little bit about sort of how Montana has played into the story? How has Montana provided a platform for you to be able to be the innovators and entrepreneurs that you are?
Yeah, I mean, Montana's awesome. I mean, sure, like I talk about the state all the time. I live in California. I would never have this business in California. And I say that openly and candidly. I mean, the support that we receive, not only on the state level, but like on the county and city level as well, has just been like phenomenal. Whether it's through banking relationships or introductions, or you got MEP, and you've got Missoula Job Service, and you've got Big Sky Trust Funds, and like throughout this entire process, we've been able to engage with the state and with the city on workforce training or new grants or job creation initiatives. And as we think about the future, we've got a pretty ripe opportunity right now, and I think that there's just a really good opportunity for us to get out and start hiring in some good talent and some good paying jobs, of which we get compensated for some of those as well, or we get reimbursements for some of those jobs. And so it's been great. I mean, everything from the governor's office on down, like they've just given wonderful support. And I think it just shows like they're truly invested in ensuring and making sure that businesses are successful. And this is pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? Like,
yep.
A lot of this amazing stuff happened in like a pre-COVID world, and then COVID happened, and you saw many of these innovation grants and job hiring grants, and like just all these different things. And they've been great. I mean, the state's been great, and the community as well. And like, we touched a little bit upon it, but like much of what we did, especially in the face shield front, was like very community driven. And so Missoula is a small community, and like we've all I think helped one another out. And so it's been really happy, and it's been a really great opportunity for us. And as I said, happy to go on.
That's awesome. And I imagine particularly in some of those sort of government things as well, it's the not only the access, but the speed with which you have that access. I can imagine in other parts of the country, you might still be waiting to have a meeting, right? To
speed,
talk about
speed is unreal. Like I mean, yeah, I could say like when this pre-face shields, like we were trying to do some of the federal stuff, and like it was like it could have been months in, right? And like still nothing has happened. And like the speed in which we could do it on the state is in some cases literally days, and that's awesome. I mean, you just can't, words can't describe like for a small business, like how important that is, especially right now. And so we've been, we feel super blessed about, having their support and the city and community support as well.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. And I love all the different dimensions of innovation that, whether by design or by, as you said, a few kind of lessons learned along the way. But I think you've got so many tremendous examples of the different ways in which you've innovated in the business. Is there anything finally, anything you want to sort of sum up with, or just share with folks who are trying to sort of be innovative in their existing businesses, or to start an entrepreneurial venture that's innovative? Do you have a couple of sort of final thoughts for folks?
I guess maybe like, I think maybe too often we're looking for the obvious and the clear answer, in terms of what we should be doing or what we should be trying to do. And often I have found it's quite the opposite of that. And look, face shields is a perfect example of that, and so I think I encourage, other entrepreneurs and business owners to be open, to be flexible, and to be willing to take some risk, calculated risk, right? And just sometimes it comes down to like looking outside of your comfort zone and what you're familiar with, but trying to, take and utilize some of the assets and skills you've learned in your current business to go try to do something different. And so, that's what we so far it's been working for us. It hasn't been without its hiccups and obstacles along the way, but it's so far that's worked well for us, and we're going to continue to do that going forward here.
No, I think that's great. I think you used a phrase that I mentioned earlier in response to something you'd said about sort of being open to possibility. And it's probably also something about Montana and the response that you've seen, right? People are open to trying to help people explore kind of new ideas and new possibilities. So,
for sure.
So, been a great conversation. Appreciate your time, Ben. Appreciate what you're doing with both your businesses, and excited to see how some of your kind of new sort of opportunities in this last mile space kind of come together over the next few months. So, really appreciate your time and taking the time to chat with us today.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. Glad to chat, and hopefully we can share more publicly in the coming weeks. I'm hopeful. So time will tell, and looking forward to sharing more with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.